On April 18, 2008, the streets of Tehran, Iran, were filled with the thunder of a military parade celebrating the founding of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. From a fortified podium, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei watched, surrounded by commanders whose uniforms bore medals from the Iran-Iraq War. Fighter jets roared overhead, tanks rumbled past in precise columns, and Revolutionary Guards marched in lockstep, their Kalashnikovs glinting in the morning sun. Within the 3rd Battalion, 4 soldiers marched with flawless precision. Their uniforms were perfect copies, boots polished to a mirror shine, faces stern and disciplined. They carried modified photographic equipment disguised as standard army gear. The commands in their earpieces came not from Iranian officers, but from a communications van parked 3 kilometers away, where urgent whispers were spoken in Hebrew. These 4 men were not Iranians. They were Israeli intelligence operatives conducting one of the most audacious infiltration operations in Mossad's history. For 6 months they had prepared for this single morning, studying Farsi dialects specific to military contexts, memorizing parade protocols down to the angle for presenting arms, and learning the biographies of officers they would march past, so that if stopped and questioned, they could reference a shared service history that never existed. What they were to document would alter Middle East security calculations for the next decade. Beneath the parade's splendor lay weapon systems whose existence Iran had denied. Missile platforms with ranges threatening not only Israel but European capitals, and nuclear weapons carriers contradicting all assurances given to international inspectors. The 4 operatives had 47 minutes to obtain photographic evidence that would be presented in closed briefings to American, British, and French intelligence agencies. Evidence so detailed that denying Iran's nuclear ambitions would become diplomatically impossible. This is the story of how Mossad inserted agents into Iran's most guarded military event. How they trained to become Iranian soldiers, convincing enough to deceive officers with decades of service. How they engineered equipment to function undetected in an environment repeatedly swept for listening devices. And how they exfiltrated from Tehran after photographing weapons the Iranian government spent billions to hide from the world. It reveals something about intelligence operations rarely depicted in fiction. The grueling preparation required for missions lasting only hours, the psychological cost of fully immersing in an enemy persona where one's own nationality feels foreign, and the narrow margin between operational success and catastrophic failure, where a mispronounced word or forgotten protocol could mean capture, torture, and execution. The operation began not with a bold infiltration, but with bureaucratic analysis in a windowless office in Tel Aviv. In late 2007, analysts from Israeli military intelligence, studying satellite imagery of Iranian military sites, noticed construction patterns inconsistent with declared defensive infrastructure. New bunkers appeared near Parchin, southeast of Tehran, built with architectural features matching nuclear weapons development facilities. Transportation routes for heavy machinery were expanding. Security perimeters widened around sites Iran called conventional military bases. The imagery provided evidence of suspicious activity, but not conclusive proof. Satellites can photograph a building, but not what occurs inside. They can track vehicle movement, but not cargo contents. Israeli military planners needed human intelligence. Eyes inside Iranian facilities that could confirm whether the construction matched nuclear weapons development or had an innocent explanation the Iranian government could legitimately conceal for security reasons. Traditional human intelligence gathering in Iran had become exceptionally difficult. After decades of Israeli and Western intelligence operations, Iranian counterintelligence had grown sophisticated and paranoid. They assumed foreign agents operated throughout Iranian society and conducted aggressive surveillance of anyone with suspicious foreign contacts, unusual travel patterns, or unexplained wealth. Recruiting Iranian sources required years of cultivation and carried immense risks. Several Israeli agents had been captured and executed in the 1990s and early 2000s. Their arrests were reported in Iranian media as warnings against cooperation with enemy intelligence services. The task was compounded by Iran's isolation. Western sanctions limited legitimate business contacts traditionally used by intelligence services for cover. Tourism was restricted and monitored. Academic exchanges were heavily vetted. Standard methods for inserting operatives into target countries worked poorly in Iran's closed society, where strangers attracted attention and foreigners were under constant observation. But Iranian military culture presented an unusual vulnerability. The Revolutionary Guards prided themselves on their capabilities and sought to demonstrate strength through public events. Annual military parades showcased new weapon systems for projecting power, both domestically and internationally. These parades required assembling thousands of soldiers from different units, creating temporary organizational chaos where individual soldiers might not know everyone in their formation. These events were public spectacles, making airtight security impossible without undermining the parade's propaganda purpose. Israeli military intelligence identified this as a potential insertion opportunity. If operatives could be embedded in the parade formation, they would gain sanctioned access to weapons systems otherwise protected by layers of military security. The parade route passed directly before platforms displaying Iran's most advanced missiles and artillery. Operatives marching in formation would have an unobstructed view for 40 to 50 minutes, close enough to photograph technical details indistinguishable in satellite imagery. The proposal was presented to the Mossad director in December 2007. The initial reaction was skeptical, bordering on dismissal. The operational challenges seemed insurmountable. Iranian military uniforms needed perfect replication down to unit insignia and metal tags that changed frequently. Operatives needed fluent Farsi to pass as native speakers under stress. They required military bearing, convincing to professional soldiers with years of service. They needed documentation matching Iran's complex military identification systems. And they needed extraction plans to get them out of Tehran after mission completion. But the intelligence value was undeniable. Photographic evidence of Iran's actual military capabilities would either confirm or refute assessments based on satellite imagery and intercepted communications. It would give political leaders confidence in military planning currently based on assumptions and estimates. And it would demonstrate to the Iranian government that Israel possessed intelligence capabilities penetrating Iran's most protected institutions. A psychologically deterrent effect whose value extended beyond any single operation. After 3 weeks of debate among senior leadership, authorization was given. The operation was codenamed Parashat Seva, Hebrew for parade colors. The timeline was aggressive. The next major military parade was scheduled for April 18, 2008, commemorating the founding of the Revolutionary Guard Corps, leaving approximately 4 months for preparation, insertion, execution, and extraction. Intelligence operations of this complexity typically required a year or more. Compressing the schedule exponentially increased risks, but waiting another year meant Iran's nuclear program would advance further before Israel obtained definitive intelligence. The Mossad division Metzada, responsible for covert operations on hostile territory, assumed command of Parashat Seva. They began by forming a team with specific requirements. Operatives needed fluency in Farsi, not just conversational skill, but the ability to navigate military terminology and regional dialects. They required physical conditioning, matching Iranian military standards, and the ability to march in formation without betraying unfamiliarity with Iranian protocols. They needed psychological resilience to maintain cover under extreme stress, knowing exposure would likely lead to torture and execution, not prisoner exchange. 4 operatives were selected from a candidate pool, vetted over 2 weeks. Their identities remain classified, protected by the same operational security safeguarding all Metzada personnel. For this account, they will be referred to by operational call signs Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and Dalet. Aleph was the team leader, a veteran of operations in Syria and Lebanon with a decade of experience infiltrating hostile territory. Bet and Gimel were younger operatives who had proven themselves in surveillance operations across Europe and the Middle East. Dalet was the communications specialist, responsible for ensuring secure transmission of intelligence collected during the operation. Their training began at a base in the Negev desert, chosen for its isolation and climatic similarity to Tehran's April weather. A section of the Iranian military parade route was recreated using satellite imagery and footage from previous parades obtained from open sources and intelligence intercepts. The team practiced marching in formation for hours daily, learning the specific rhythm and rifle movements used by Revolutionary Guard units. Former Iranian military officers who had defected to Israel during and after the 1979 revolution were brought in as consultants, teaching the operatives protocols and correcting the smallest errors in posture or weapon handling that could betray inexperience to seasoned soldiers. Language training was intensive and immersive. Operatives spent 12 hours daily speaking only Farsi, conducting all activities from meals to briefings in the target language. Native Farsi speakers were embedded with the team, listening for pronunciation errors, grammatical mistakes, or idioms that could mark the operatives as non-native. Special attention was paid to military terminology, slang used by Revolutionary Guard soldiers, and regional accents typical of Tehran and surrounding provinces, where parade participants would likely be drawn. The most challenging aspect was cultural immersion. Being Iranian required more than speaking the language and wearing the uniform. It required thinking with cultural assumptions different from those the operatives had internalized growing up in Israel. Minor behavioral details could expose them. Patterns of eye contact, norms of personal space, gestures, and facial expressions that differ between cultures. Religious rituals that Iranian soldiers would perform automatically, but that Israeli operatives might forget or perform incorrectly. The team obsessively studied Iranian military culture, watching hundreds of hours of footage showing Iranian soldiers in various contexts, noting how they interacted with officers, with each other, with civilians. While the operatives trained, intelligence analysts worked on obtaining authentic Iranian military uniforms and documentation. Mossad collection networks in Europe contacted black market arms dealers who maintained relationships with corrupt Iranian military personnel willing to sell equipment for Western currency. Over 2 months, 6 complete sets of Revolutionary Guard uniforms were purchased through intermediaries, along with identity cards, pay slips, and unit assignment documents that served as templates for forgeries. The uniforms underwent forensic analysis. Thread counts were matched exactly. Fabric dyes were chemically analyzed to ensure visual uniformity under different lighting conditions. Buttons, rank insignia, and medals were compared with reference materials to verify authenticity. Even signs of wear were studied. New uniforms would attract attention in a unit where most soldiers wore gear seeing months or years of service. Uniforms acquired through black market channels showed appropriate aging, but required modification to fit the operatives' body sizes while maintaining an authentic look. Documentation presented more complex problems. Iranian military identification systems used multiple security levels. Photo IDs with embedded holograms, the designs of which changed periodically. Assignment orders with official seals and signature stamps, whose designs were closely guarded. Medical records and service histories that would be checked if operatives were questioned. Creating forgeries convincing enough to withstand inspection required information on current document formats, which changed faster than Mossad sources could reliably track. The solution came through a high-risk source operation. An Iranian officer serving in the Revolutionary Guard Administrative Department was recruited during his vacation in Turkey. The officer, whose identity and motives remain classified, provided current samples of military documentation in exchange for substantial payment and guarantees of asylum if his cooperation was exposed. The materials he provided allowed Mossad document forgers to create identification packages for the 4 operatives that precisely matched current Iranian standards. The equipment carried by the operatives required equally sophisticated engineering. They needed cameras capable of photographing weapon systems from 20 to 50 meters while marching in formation. Cameras had to operate silently, without visible flashes or obvious shutter mechanisms. They had to be disguised as standard military equipment soldiers could legitimately carry, and they had to store hundreds of high-resolution images in formats that could be securely transmitted if operatives failed to physically extract the equipment. The Technological Division of Israeli Military Intelligence developed camera systems integrated into what looked like standard military radio gear. Camera lenses were hidden behind a cloth mesh soldiers could wear as part of communication gear. Activation was controlled by pressure switches embedded in the operatives' rifle grips, allowing them to photograph while appearing to maintain proper marching posture. Systems recorded data to solid-state memory that could be remotely erased if operatives were captured, preventing Iranian intelligence from recovering the images. Testing the equipment in realistic conditions revealed problems requiring iterative solutions. Early camera prototypes produced images with insufficient resolution to capture technical details from required distances. Lenses were redesigned, balancing optical quality with physical size constraints. Battery life calculations showed cameras could operate for approximately 30 minutes before recharging, barely enough for the parade's duration. Engineers developed more efficient power management systems that increased operational time to 50 minutes with a safety margin. By the end of March 2008, preparation entered its final phase. The operatives had trained for 3 months, reaching a level of proficiency in Iranian military protocols their instructors deemed sufficient to withstand casual inspection. They could march in formation with precision matching Iranian standards. They could perform rifle drills without hesitation. They could converse in Farsi with vocabulary and accents matching their cover as soldiers from a Revolutionary Guard unit based in Tehran province. But proficiency in controlled training conditions did not guarantee success in operational reality. The team had never faced the psychological pressure of operating on hostile territory where every Iranian around them was a potential threat. They had never tested their cover on real Iranian soldiers, whose suspicions could be triggered by details impossible to anticipate during training. They had never navigated the chaos and confusion of an actual military parade, where unexpected situations would demand immediate improvised responses. The insertion plan required operatives to enter Iran individually, using different routes and covers. Aleph and Bet were to fly into Tehran's Imam Khomeini International Airport from Dubai, traveling as Iranian businessmen returning from meetings with export companies. Gimel was to cross the border from Turkey using forged Iranian documents, identifying him as a truck driver transporting commercial goods. Dalit was to arrive from Baghdad, posing as an Iranian working in Iraq's reconstruction sector. Separated arrivals reduced the risk Iranian counterintelligence would notice a suspicious pattern of simultaneous foreign entries into the country. Aleph and Bet flew from Dubai on April 12, 6 days before the parade. Their cover as businessmen required maintaining detailed knowledge of Iranian export industries, complete with business cards, contracts, and contact information that were actually Mossad assets ready to confirm the operatives' identities if Iranian security services conducted checks. They landed in Tehran on schedule, passed through immigration control without incident, and took taxis to separate hotels in different city districts. Gimel's border crossing from Turkey proved more problematic. Turkish-Iranian border posts were notoriously corrupt and chaotic, but also unpredictable. Guards might wave trucks through with minimal inspection or detain drivers for hours conducting searches that were actually opportunities for extortion. Gimel arrived at the border on April 13 and waited 7 hours in a queue of commercial vehicles before his turn for inspection. Iranian guards examined his cargo, refrigerated produce bound for Tehran markets, and questioned him about his route and schedule. Gimel's Farsi withstood the interrogation, but the guards demanded a bribe before permitting passage. He paid the expected amount. Too much would arouse suspicion, as would too little, and entered Iran with his cover intact. Dalit faced the most dangerous insertion. Baghdad in 2008 remained violently unstable, controlled in theory by the Iraqi government, but in practice divided between American military forces, sectarian militias, and criminal organizations. The Baghdad-Tehran route crossed areas where kidnappings and robberies were common. Dalit traveled in a convoy of Iranian workers returning home, counting on the group to provide some protection from random violence while offering cover as an unremarkable member of a larger group. The convoy reached the Iranian border on April 14 without incident. Iranian border guards processed the workers efficiently. Most were frequent travelers whose identities were already verified in Iranian databases. Dalit's forged documents identified him as someone who had worked in Baghdad for 6 months, a plausible timeframe that wouldn't attract undue attention. He was waved through after brief questioning and boarded a bus to Tehran. With all 4 operatives inside Iran, the operation entered its most vulnerable phase. They needed to contact each other, assemble their equipment, and integrate into the parade formation without attracting Iranian counterintelligence attention. Any of these steps could trigger detection. Iranian security services monitored foreign businessmen as potential intelligence collectors. They tracked communications for suspicious patterns. They conducted surveillance around government and military facilities. The operatives had to assume they might already be under observation and behave accordingly. The contact protocol was established during training. On April 15, 3 days before the parade, Aleph visited a specific carpet shop in Tehran's Grand Bazaar at a prearranged time. The shop was operated by an asset who had worked with Israeli intelligence for years, providing safe houses for meetings and message-passing services. Aleph browsed carpets, made small talk with the shop owner, and left after 15 minutes. 30 minutes later, Bet entered the same shop, repeated the process, and departed. The shop owner confirmed to each operative that the others had arrived safely in Tehran. The next day, April 16, the operatives made contact with the Revolutionary Guard unit they were to infiltrate. This was a critical vulnerability of the operation. They couldn't simply appear at the parade and join the formation. Iranian military protocol required soldiers to report to their units days before major events for briefings, equipment checks, and rehearsals. The operatives needed to infiltrate during this preparation period without raising questions about why unfamiliar faces suddenly appeared. The solution exploited the chaos inherent in assembling thousands of soldiers from different bases for a single event. Formations were composed from multiple sources, combining regular personnel with reinforcements drawn to expand the ranks for the parade's visual effect. Soldiers who had never served together were expected to march in synchronized formation after minimal rehearsal. Officers managing this organizational complexity focused on aggregate results, full formations marching correctly, not on verifying each individual soldier's identity. The operatives presented themselves at a Revolutionary Guard assembly point on Tehran's outskirts, carrying forged orders assigning them to a ceremonial battalion. The orders looked authentic, complete with official seals and signatures from Tehran-based command. When an overworked lieutenant checked their documentation, he was faced with papers that looked correct and 4 soldiers standing at attention with proper military bearing. He noted their names on his roster and directed them to join other soldiers assembling for transport to the rehearsal ground. The rehearsal on April 17 was the operation's most dangerous moment. For 6 hours, the operatives marched in formation beside Iranian soldiers who had trained together for months. Any deviation from protocol, any unfamiliar response to commands could raise questions, but the rehearsal also provided validation. The operatives performed drill movements without error. They responded to commands in Farsi without hesitation. They interacted with other soldiers during breaks with appropriate casualness, neither too friendly nor too aloof. One close call occurred when a sergeant asked Aleph about his previous service, standard conversation between soldiers getting acquainted. Aleph had memorized a service history matching his forged documents, but the sergeant mentioned knowing someone from the unit Aleph claimed to have served in. Aleph responded with careful vagueness, acknowledging he might have known the person, but that he served in a different company, and the unit was large enough that not all soldiers knew each other. The sergeant accepted this explanation and shifted conversation to complaints about rehearsal conditions, a safer topic requiring no specialized knowledge. By evening, the operatives had passed inspection and integrated into the battalion. They had demonstrated their cover could withstand operational conditions, but the mission's objective still lay ahead. They needed to photograph the weapon systems during the parade itself while maintaining cover, then exfiltrate from Tehran before Iranian security services potentially realized unauthorized personnel had infiltrated the event. Parade day, April 18, began before dawn. Soldiers assembled at muster points across Tehran, boarding buses that delivered them to staging areas along the parade route. The operatives rode with their assigned unit, sitting among Iranian soldiers discussing the upcoming event with a mixture of pride and boredom. Participating in the parade was an honor, but also an exhausting duty requiring standing in formation for hours in April heat. By 8 a.m., formations were assembled along the parade route. The operatives stood in the third row of their battalion, deliberately positioned to provide clear views of the weapon platforms, while not being so prominent that officers would pay them extra attention. Aleph stood directly behind the battalion's flag bearer. Bet and Gimel flanked him on either side. Dalit positioned himself 2 rows back, where his communication equipment looked appropriate for his assigned role as radioman. The parade began at 9 o'clock with ceremonial formalities. Officials gave speeches praising the Revolutionary Guards and condemning foreign enemies. Fighter jets performed flyovers. Attack helicopters hovered overhead. Then the ground units began their march. Battalion after battalion moved past the grandstands, where Supreme Leader Khamenei and senior commanders watched the display of military might. When the operatives' battalion received the command to march, they moved forward in step with the soldiers around them. The street was filled with crowds waving Iranian flags and chanting slogans. Security personnel watched from rooftops and street corners. News cameras recorded the parade for state television broadcast. The operatives marched with eyes forward. Hands gripped their rifles with pressure switches hidden in the grips, activating cameras concealed in their gear. As they approached the weapon platforms, Aleph could see the systems Israeli intelligence had tried to photograph for months. Shahab-3 missiles with ranges capable of reaching Israel and potentially carrying nuclear warheads. Zelzal artillery rockets, shown publicly for the first time. Modified Scud variants that Iranian engineers had upgraded with improved guidance systems. Anti-aircraft batteries representing a threat to Israeli aircraft in any future conflict. The cameras captured everything. Aleph photographed the Shahab-3 missiles from an angle showing their mounting systems and transport vehicles, details revealing how quickly they could be deployed. Bet focused on the Zelzal rockets, photographing warhead configurations and launch mechanisms. Gimel documented the modified Scuds, recording serial numbers and technical markings that would allow analysts to determine production origin and capabilities. Dalit photographed the anti-aircraft systems, recording radar configurations and missile loads. Photographing occurred over 42 minutes as the battalion marched past the weapon platforms, then continued along the parade route to its termination point. The operatives maintained marching discipline throughout, never breaking formation or making movements that looked inconsistent with proper military bearing. The cameras operated silently, recording hundreds of high-resolution images to encrypted memory storage. When the battalion reached the parade's endpoint, soldiers were dismissed to muster points where they were to board buses returning them to their bases. This was the operatives' extraction moment. They had rehearsed this phase repeatedly during training. They needed to separate from the unit without appearing to desert and without attracting officers, conducting final accountability checks. The plan exploited the confusion inherent in simultaneously dispersing thousands of soldiers. As their battalion moved toward the bus loading area, the operatives drifted to the edges of the formation. When the formation stopped near a row of portable toilets, Aleph signaled the team. They dispersed individually, heading toward the toilets as if answering biological needs. They entered separate stalls, removed their military tunics to reveal civilian clothing underneath, and discarded the tunics in trash bins. Within 90 seconds, they transformed from Iranian soldiers into ordinary civilians. They exited the toilets and moved away from the muster point, walking with purposeful casualness that suggested legitimate reasons for being in the area. They did not walk together or acknowledge each other. They headed in different directions toward predetermined extraction points across Tehran, where transportation waited to move them toward Iran's borders. Aleph and Bet reached a safe house in northern Tehran, operated by a Mossad asset. They remained there for 36 hours, allowing time for any immediate search efforts to concentrate elsewhere before proceeding to Imam Khomeini International Airport for separate flights out of Iran. Aleph flew to Baku, Azerbaijan. Bet departed for Ankara, Turkey. Both carried photographic equipment containing the parade images, divided to ensure that if one operative was intercepted, the other could still deliver the intelligence. Gimel drove toward the Turkish border in a vehicle provided by a local asset. The drive took 11 hours, deliberately slow to avoid attracting road police attention. He crossed the border on April 20 without incident, using the same forged Iranian documents that allowed his entry. Turkish authorities stamped his passport and waved him through. He drove to Ankara, contacting Israeli embassy personnel, who arranged his immediate return to Tel Aviv. Dalit's extraction was complicated by an Iranian security sweep in Tehran following unrelated intelligence about potential Kurdish separatist activity. Checkpoints were established throughout the city, and security forces conducted document checks with increased thoroughness. Dalit couldn't risk attempting to leave Tehran during the sweep. He remained in a safe house for 4 days, conserving food and water while waiting for security operations to diminish. On April 23, 5 days after the parade, security presence lessened. Dalit left the safe house and went to a bus station, boarding a bus toward the Iraqi border. The journey took 8 hours. At the border, Iranian guards conducted a cursory document check and allowed the bus to proceed. Dalit crossed into Iraq, reached Baghdad's Green Zone, and contacted American military personnel who facilitated his handover to Israeli diplomatic staff. He was on a military flight to Tel Aviv by April 25. All 4 operatives successfully exfiltrated from Iran with photographic intelligence intact. The operation achieved its objective without operational compromise. Iranian authorities had no indication foreign intelligence agents had infiltrated the military parade. The images were immediately subjected to detailed analysis by Israeli military intelligence and shared with American, British, and French intelligence agencies through established communication channels. The photographs confirmed assessments of Iran's missile capabilities, while revealing details satellite imagery couldn't capture. The Shahab-3 missiles showed modifications, suggesting they were being prepared for nuclear warhead integration. The Zelzal rockets displayed guidance systems more sophisticated than previous intelligence estimates assumed. The modified Scuds carried markings indicating North Korean technical assistance, confirming suspected cooperation between Iran and North Korea on ballistic missile development. The intelligence influenced Israeli military planning for potential strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities. It provided political leaders with detailed evidence for diplomatic efforts to increase international pressure on Iran. And it demonstrated to the Iranian leadership that Israeli intelligence could penetrate Iran's most protected institutions, a psychological message intended to deter Iranian aggression through demonstrated capability. The operatives underwent psychological debriefing after returning to Israel. All reported experiencing acute stress during the operation, particularly during the parade when surrounded by thousands of Iranian soldiers and security personnel. Alif described feeling cognitive dissonance, simultaneously inhabiting his Israeli identity while performing the role of an Iranian soldier so convincingly he momentarily forgot which identity was genuine. Bet and Gimel reported similar experiences, noting the intensive cultural training created reflexive Iranian behavioral patterns that persisted for weeks after the operation concluded. Dalit, who spent the longest period in Iran due to extraction delays, exhibited symptoms of acute stress disorder. He had difficulty sleeping, experienced intrusive memories of the operation, and struggled with hypervigilance that made adjusting to normal life difficult. Mossad medical personnel provided counseling and treatment, acknowledging that prolonged exposure to life-threatening operational stress caused psychological effects requiring professional intervention. The success of Parashat Seva established protocols Israeli intelligence used in subsequent operations requiring infiltration of hostile environments. Intensive cultural and language training, exploiting chaotic events like military parades as insertion opportunities, engineering surveillance equipment disguised as legitimate items. These methodologies were refined and applied in operations in Syria, Lebanon, and possibly elsewhere, where Israeli intelligence collection required human operatives in environments where foreign presence is restricted. But the operation also revealed the limitation of human intelligence collection in high-security environments. The operatives could photograph weapons publicly displayed during the parade, but couldn't access research facilities where nuclear weapons development actually occurred. They could document Iran's ballistic missile capabilities, but couldn't penetrate the decision-making processes determining how those capabilities would be applied. Human intelligence provides valuable tactical information, but rarely achieves strategic intelligence objectives without extensive source networks operating for years. The psychological cost of operations like Parashat Seva raises ethical questions about the treatment of intelligence operatives. The four men who infiltrated the Iranian military parade voluntarily accepted risks they understood could lead to capture, torture, and execution. But the long-term psychological consequences of operating under such extreme stress, identity confusion, persistent hypervigilance, difficulty returning to normal life, these consequences extend beyond the mission's duration and affect operatives for years or decades after. Intelligence agencies celebrate operational successes while providing limited support to operatives coping with psychological trauma. A cultural emphasis on resilience and professional detachment discourages operatives from acknowledging difficulties or seeking help. Many suffer in silence, appearing weak or unreliable to organizations that value operational capability over individual well-being. The human cost of intelligence gathering is measured not only in operatives who die during missions, but in those who survive operations but struggle to return to the lives they left behind. Parashat Seva demonstrated that with sufficient training, technological sophistication, and operational daring, intelligence services can penetrate seemingly impermeable security environments. But it also showed such operations require accepting risks and costs extending far beyond mission parameters. The four operatives who marched in Tehran's military parade succeeded in their immediate objective, gathering intelligence that served Israel's security interests. Did that success justify the psychological burden they carry, the years of their lives consumed by preparation and recovery? It's a question intelligence agencies rarely acknowledge, let alone attempt to answer. The images taken during the parade remain classified, stored in Israeli intelligence archives, accessible only to personnel with the highest clearances. Some were shared with Allied intelligence services, some used in secret briefings for political leaders considering policy options toward Iran. Some likely informed military planning for operations that may or may not have been executed. The full intelligence value obtained from the operation will never be publicly disclosed. What can be stated with certainty is that on April 18, 2008, four Israeli intelligence operatives stood in the heart of Tehran, surrounded by thousands of Iranian soldiers, photographing weapon systems Iran spent billions to hide from international scrutiny. They penetrated one of the world's most paranoid security states, flawlessly executed their mission, and exfiltrated unnoticed. The operation stands as testament to the capabilities of modern intelligence services when resources, planning, and human courage combine to achieve a common objective. It also serves as proof that in the shadow world of intelligence operations, the boundaries between possible and impossible are defined not by physical limitations, but by the willingness of operatives to so fully immerse in false personas that their own sense of self becomes uncertain. The line between Israeli intelligence officer and Iranian soldier blurred for the four operatives during those 42 minutes of marching. They became who they pretended to be so convincingly that Iranian officers standing meters away never suspected enemies walked among their ranks. That transformation, the ability to dissolve one identity and inhabit another with complete authenticity, represents the dark art at the heart of espionage. Neither technology, nor weapons, nor tactical superiority ensures intelligence operation success. It is the human capacity for deception, so profound it deceives even the deceivers themselves. And when operations conclude and covers are discarded, operatives who return from hostile territories carry with them the ghosts of the personas they inhabited, the Iranian soldiers they pretended to be, the lies they told so convincingly that truth itself became negotiable. If you found this deep dive into one of Mossad's boldest operations compelling, please show your support by liking this video. Your engagement helps bring these hidden histories to light. Consider subscribing and enabling notifications so you never miss our explorations of denied missions and the operatives who execute them. We value your perspective. In today's world of biometric security and pervasive surveillance, do you believe such an infiltration operation could still succeed, or has technology made deep cover insertion impossible? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Technology made deep cover insertion impossible. Share your thoughts in the comments below.